They called me a freeloader. I covered their mortgage. They said I was ungrateful. I paid their debts. When I finally left, they sued me. And that's when I decided to expose everything. My name is Madison Hayes. I turned 30 years old on the day everything fell apart. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house in Springfield, Missouri, just as the sun was setting, casting a soft, golden light over the neighborhood I'd known my whole life. There was a chill in the air, the kind that slides under your coat collar and makes you hug yourself tighter. On the passenger seat was a small cake box with cheap vanilla frosting and "Happy Birthday" scrawled in crooked red icing. I had picked it up myself from the corner store. $20, give or take. The teenage cashier had spelled my name wrong, but I didn't correct him. I was too tired. When I walked inside, the house felt off. Not that I was expecting balloons or a card. I knew better. My parents, Darryl and Lorna, had stopped acknowledging my birthday years ago. But there was something colder than usual. The kitchen lights hummed overhead, casting that flat, sterile light on the usual dinner lineup. Meatloaf, canned green beans, boxed mashed potatoes. Before I could even take my coat off, my dad barked from the table, "You're late." I set the cake down, trying not to let the plastic bag crinkle too loudly. "Worked late," I said. "Had reports to finish." My voice didn't crack. I didn't apologize. Mom didn't say a word, just kept staring at her plate like she hadn't heard me at all. I sat down slowly, the tension already crawling across the room like a storm coming in. Something was wrong, and I felt it before I knew it. I should have seen it coming. Maybe deep down, I did. For years, I convinced myself that what I was doing was normal, expected even. I paid the utility bills. I covered half the mortgage. I picked up groceries when the fridge was bare. My name was on the electric, the water, even the cable. And when the roof started leaking last spring, it was me up there on the ladder, hammering shingles in the rain while Dad sat inside watching TV, beer in hand, shouting that you can't trust contractors these days. When Mum's tires blew out last winter, I skipped work, bought her a full new set, and paid for the tow truck she couldn't afford. She gave me a half smile and said, "You're a good girl," before handing me the repair invoice like it was my responsibility. It always was, wasn't it? And I thought that was love. I thought staying, helping, picking up the pieces they dropped, that meant I belonged, that I was needed. I didn't realize I was being used. Not until that night. Not until Dad slammed his fork on the table and said, "You're too old to be freeloading." Freeloading. After everything. It hit like a slap, sharp and humiliating. I looked to Mom, hoping she'd speak up, but she just kept her eyes down. Her lips were pressed so tight they'd lost all color. That silence said everything. I listed the things I paid for. Calmly. Factually. Not to defend myself, just to remind them. But Dad laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Paying a few bills doesn't mean you get to live here forever, princess." That word, princess, used to mean something soft. Now it was a punchline. They didn't just want me out. They wanted me gone. Quietly. Without protest. Without dignity. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I just sat there, staring at my half-eaten plate, the meatloaf congealing under the kitchen lights. The small cake sat on the counter behind me, still in its plastic bag, already forgotten. One candle was missing. Probably fell out in the car, but somehow it felt symbolic. One piece missing. One person too many. One moment too late. I pushed my plate away and stood up, slowly, like my body had to catch up with what my mind already knew. "Got it," I said, my voice quiet but final. My dad leaned back with a smug little grin, like he'd won something. My mom didn't look at me. Her shame didn't weigh enough to make her speak. I went upstairs. Every step creaked under my feet like it was warning me not to come back. The packed bags by the closet had been sitting there for weeks. I hadn't told anyone I was planning to leave because part of me had hoped, stupidly, that I wouldn't have to, that something would change, that if I just kept being useful, they'd remember how to love me. But they didn't. They chose that night, my birthday, to tell me I wasn't wanted. And I believed them. I started moving through the room with a kind of focus that felt mechanical. I took off my jacket, folded it neatly, zipped up the suitcase. I opened my laptop and began cancelling things. Auto pay for the electric, the water, the Wi-Fi. All in my name. All gone. I moved my money into a private account I'd opened months ago, just in case. Tonight was that case. They didn't just kick me out. They made sure I knew I'd never really belonged. By morning, the silence I'd left behind had turned into noise. My phone lit up with missed calls, 12 of them. Dad, Mom, a few numbers I didn't recognize. Probably nosy neighbors or distant relatives who'd suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away. I already knew what they'd say. Blame dressed up as confusion. Anger wrapped in concern. Guilt paraded as love. I stared at the screen for a long minute, feeling everything and nothing all at once. Then a text popped up from my cousin Lucas. "Internet's down. No lights. Dad's pissed. Mom's crying." I let the phone drop onto the mattress. It had begun. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of tired that settles into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I sat in the quiet of Nora's apartment, sipping the coffee she'd placed gently in front of me. She didn't ask questions, just sat beside me on the floor, legs crossed, sipping from her own mug. "They're panicking," I said finally. She nodded. "Good," she said simply. "Sometimes saving yourself looks like betrayal to people who only loved your usefulness." A few hours later, another voicemail came in, Mom's voice, soft and shaking. "Honey, this must be a mistake. You wouldn't leave us like this. Please call. We're family." I closed my eyes. The word family echoed, hollow and desperate. Funny how quickly freeloader turned back into daughter when the lights went out. Then Dad texted, "You'll regret this. No warmth, no question. Just a threat." I flipped the phone over and silenced it. I wouldn't go back. Not this time. Let them feel the weight of the silence they gave me for years. I waited. Not to see them fall apart, but to see if they'd even realize what they'd lost. The answer came faster than I thought. My dad went straight to Facebook. He posted some dramatic message in the local town group. "Some daughters are raised with gratitude. Others become selfish. Ours left us sick, starving, and abandoned. Pray for us." The comments rolled in like a bad storm. People I barely knew chimed in, judging, pitying, shaming. "Ungrateful brat! Parents sacrifice everything, and this is how you repay them?" One person even wrote, "No wonder she's alone." It stung. I won't lie. Even after everything, those words still found a soft spot. Then came a message from Lucas again. Just one sentence. Dad told Mom to fake chest pains next if guilt-tripping you doesn't work. I stared at it. The air caught in my chest. So, that was the plan. Not understanding, not accountability. Just another manipulation, a new angle to pull me back in. Not because they missed me, but because they missed what I could do for them. That night, I pulled out a yellow notepad and started writing. Not a letter to them, but a list. Every bill I had paid, every repair I had funded, every meal, every ride, every emergency call I had answered. I wrote it all down in ink. Proof that I wasn't the villain in their story. Then I scanned every receipt, every transaction. I built a file, my insurance, my armor. When people asked what happened, I'd be ready. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted peace. But mostly, I wanted freedom from the lie that being useful is the same as being loved. And for the first time in my life, I stopped apologizing for choosing myself. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. I sat at the kitchen table, slid my finger under the flap, and pulled out the documents. Pages and pages of accusations from my father. Theft, emotional abuse, financial abandonment, a lawsuit dressed up like a tantrum. Nora stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "They're trying to sue you because you finally walked away." For a second, I felt that familiar panic, that old voice that said, "Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should have just stayed quiet." But it faded quickly. I wasn't that girl anymore. I pulled out my folder of receipts and evidence, scanned everything again, and made an appointment with a legal aid clinic in Columbus. The paralegal I spoke with listened closely, then said, "Honestly, it sounds like you should be the one suing for exploitation." So I did. I filed my own report. Years of unpaid financial support under emotional coercion. Turns out elder abuse goes both ways when adult children are guilted into funding someone else's life. Mom called soon after. Her voice trembled. "Madison, you're tearing this family apart. We just wanted what was best for you." An hour later, a text from Dad. "Family always gets the last word." I looked at the screen, then the broken birthday candle I'd saved from that night. "Not this time," I whispered. After that, I moved fast. I found a tiny rental unit in downtown Columbia. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors, old pipes, and a view of the alley. But it was mine. I didn't tell anyone where I was going except Nora. She helped me carry boxes and picked out a used couch from a thrift store. The cushions were sun-faded, but I didn't care. We painted the walls a soft blue, the kind of color that makes you breathe easier without realizing why. Every corner I touched felt like reclaiming something I hadn't even known I'd lost. For the first few weeks, I filled my time with small tasks. I hung a curtain that didn't quite reach the floor. I bought mismatched dishes from a garage sale. I rearranged furniture that barely fit until it felt like a home. At night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and listened to the city breathe. Cars passing, dogs barking, kids laughing somewhere down the street. It wasn't quiet, but it wasn't heavy either. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. I wasn't waiting for someone to toss me another unpaid bill or another guilt trip disguised as affection. I woke up, made coffee, and the only voice I heard was mine. It was strange and beautiful. Then one afternoon, while unpacking a final box, I found it, the candle from the birthday cake, bent, chipped, barely recognizable. I held it in my hand and felt not sad, not angry, just still. That little candle, once a reminder of everything that broke me, now felt like a trophy. Not for what I lost, but for what I survived. I placed it on a shelf in the corner of my new apartment, my own quiet monument. Not to my parents, to myself. It didn't take long for the town to catch up. Word traveled fast in places like Springfield. At first, I tried to stay under the radar, just running errands, keeping my head down. But whispers started following me. At the grocery store, the gas station, even the post office. People weren't sure what to believe. My parents were talking. Loudly. My dad was standing near the local farmers market one Saturday, just outside the apple cider booth, telling anyone who'd listen. She turned her back on us. After all we sacrificed. I felt the heat rise in my chest when I overheard it. My fists clenched, and I started walking toward him, but Nora placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Let people talk. Let them expose themselves." I stepped back and exhaled. It turned out I didn't have to say a word. Others were already piecing things together. One neighbor posted in a local Facebook group, "I remember seeing Madison shoveling their driveway at 6 a.m. when she was barely 16. Her dad just stood on the porch yelling about the cold." Another wrote, "Funny how they bragged for years that they hadn't paid a single bill since Madison got her job, and now they're the victims." Old teachers, family friends, folks who'd stayed quiet for years started speaking up. Not all at once, but enough to shift the tide, enough to crack the narrative. One afternoon, while Nora and I were walking through the fall craft fair downtown, a woman I barely recognized approached me. She was a friend of my mom's from church. Her voice was soft as she touched my shoulder. "You deserved better, sweetheart," she said. "We knew. We just didn't know what to do." That one sentence held more healing than 100 apologies. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. In that moment, I knew. The shame had never been mine. It had always been theirs. Later that night, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the lights of the town flicker on one by one. The courthouse in the distance was still lit, its warm yellow glow cutting through the dark. Somewhere across town, the house I used to call home sat in silence. The porch light was out, the driveway empty. I'd heard through the grapevine that the power company finally shut off the electricity after weeks of unpaid bills. A neighbor told Nora they'd seen my dad arguing with a utility worker out front, red-faced and yelling loud enough for half the block to hear. But I didn't rush back to fix it. Not this time. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the floor beside the bookshelf, watching the shadows stretch and sway across the walls. Everything around me was second-hand. Furniture, dishes, even the lamp beside me. But it all felt new, because none of it came with strings attached. None of it came from guilt. I glanced at the shelf and saw the tiny birthday candle, still standing in its place. Bent, but still whole. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, I felt something shift. Not in the world, but in me. I no longer needed to be needed. I didn't crave approval. I didn't miss the weight of keeping a family afloat that had never once asked if I was okay. I picked up my phone, not to check messages, but to block the last of their numbers. Every cousin, every uncle, every voice that only called to criticize, never to care. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of mercy. For them. And for me. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling through the curtains and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. Nora had left a note on the counter that just said, "You're doing great." It made me smile in that quiet, unexpected way that healing sneaks up on you. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, and looked around the apartment, at the scuffed floors, the chipped plates, the tiny shelf where that bent candle still stood. It didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like living. Later that day, I walked to the park near Main Street. There were kids playing, dogs tugging on leashes, leaves crunching under boots. I passed a bench where an older woman sat alone, knitting something pink and soft. We nodded at each other. No words, just a moment shared. It made me think, how many people are carrying stories like mine? Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly painful. And how many are still stuck in places they don't feel they're allowed to leave? That's when I knew. My story isn't rare. It's just rarely told. Family isn't made from guilt or blood or keeping quiet to keep peace. It's made from respect, from being seen, from feeling safe. And sometimes choosing yourself means walking away from people who never learned how to love without conditions. If any of this feels familiar to you, I hope you know you're not alone. You're not selfish. And you are not broken for wanting something better. If this story touched you, share your own. Speak it out loud. Follow along if you need strength, or just someone to say, I see you. Because here, your voice matters.